As we've been watching this year's NHL playoffs, which are nearing the end of the second round, it has been nice to see some teams, or actually even most teams, get at least some fans back in the buildings. And especially when it comes to Islanders fans, you can tell there was some pent-up energy that they wanted to let loose over this last year. Even if, when it comes to the Islanders, that fan excitement and crowd noise is maybe the most exciting thing about watching this team play right now with their, let's just say, defensive first type of play style. But as we're talking Seattle Kraken and expansion draft, it might be worth mentioning that this very well could be the type of strategy and play style that the Kraken themselves end up going with early on. By the way, if you find yourself enjoying this video at any point and you like to do that kind of thing, the subscribe button down there can probably help you out. Ultimately, with the Islanders, whether or not you like the way that they play the game with that defensive first strategy, you can't argue with the results that it's gotten them, especially in the playoffs, considering as I record this, they lead the Bruins 3-2 in the second round, and by the time I have this out, they very well may be moving on to the conference finals with a game tonight. It also should probably be said that when it comes to the Islanders again, and the expansion draft in particular, this is not a team that's likely to have any big, exciting, flashy names that they'll be offering to the Kraken. But again, there are a number of interesting choices that the Kraken will have, even if they aren't immediately recognizable names and are mostly guys on the younger end. Now, that's not to say that the Islanders don't have exciting players on their roster, but as you'll see as we start to get into their protection list, all of the exciting players that they do have, they'll be able to easily protect if they aren't exempt in the first place. Starting on the forward end, it may not be a surprise, but I'm sorry to say for Thunderbirds fans that Matthew Barzal is definitely a lock to be protected. And then a few other guys that I think are pretty likely to be joining him would include Brock Nelson, Jordan Eberle, Jean-Gabriel Pageau, and Anthony Beauvillier. I also think that Josh Bailey also probably ends up on this protection list. And then, while that 7th slot might be a little bit more up in the air, I also think that Anders Lee probably ends up getting this one, though there is a conversation to be said about the Islanders potentially exposing him, thinking that his contract probably keeps him safe from Seattle picking him anyway, in order to protect another one of their younger guys like Kiefer Bellows. Again, the more I look at it, I really do think that there is a pretty decent chance that Lee does end up exposed, with that contract earning him $7 million a year through 2026, especially considering he's already 30. So if he were exposed, I don't think that the Kraken would be too tempted to take him on with that contract, but at least right now, it's probably the safer option to keep him protected. Especially since when it comes to exposure requirements, they're already set with the number of contracts they have signed right now, so they don't need to expose Lee in order to have another exposed forward with a contract. And speaking of exposure requirements, on the defensive end, they also have 4 guys under contract through next season that also fit the other requirements, so they're perfectly set here as well as far as that's concerned. As far as the 3 protection spots go, I think 2 of those are pretty much guaranteed to go to Ryan Pulock and Adam Pelech. And then that 3rd spot I think is pretty likely to end up going to Nick Leddy. Meanwhile in goal, I don't see much reason that they wouldn't be protecting Semyon Varlamov, with Ken Appleby serving as the exposure requirement there. So as we move now to start talking about the players that this could leave available for the Kraken to pick from, I wasn't kidding about the fact that this is mostly going to be younger guys that you may or may not have heard of, with only 1 of the 5 players we're going to talk about having a contract through next season, while the other 4 are set to be RFAs as we talk right now. 3 of those are on the forward end. And we might as well start with the oldest of those 3 players in Michael Dal Colle, who is a winger that will actually be turning 25 here in just a couple of days. So if you are watching Michael, which I don't know why you wouldn't be, happy birthday. Drafted 5th overall by the Islanders in the first round of the 2014 entry draft, Dal Colle has now played in 111 career games across 4 NHL seasons, in that time with 21 points on 8 goals and 13 assists. So definitely has not turned into much of a points producer, at least yet, at the NHL level. And he's only played the majority of 1 season so far, that being last season, where he played 53 games. And although he didn't offer a ton of points production in those 53 games with just 10 points on 4 goals and 6 assists, he was able to use his bigger frame at 6'3", 200 pounds to his advantage a little bit more with 81 hits. Though he did seem to give up a little bit when it came to possession stats in order to lay some of those hits with a Corsi for percentage of just 43.1 and an expected plus minus of negative 5.7. So really, at least at this point anyway, he has yet to really prove himself at the NHL level, especially considering this year, although he did improve his possession stats, getting back over 50% when it comes to Corsi for. In the 26 games he played, he also had just 4 points on 1 goal and 3 assists. So definitely still working on looking for that points production, which is definitely something the Islanders are looking for from him, considering again he was a 5th overall pick, and at the AHL level he was a decent points producer there, right around a half a point per game for his first couple seasons from 2016 through 2018, and then in his most recent season in the AHL level, which was 2018-19, he was a point per game player with 34 points in 34 games on 18 goals and 16 assists. So that points production should be in there somewhere. Now the Islanders just have to figure out how to find it. Or I guess if the Kraken pick him, then it would be up to them to figure out what's missing. Another guy with a birthday coming up here in the next couple of days, in fact it's actually on Thursday, the day I'll probably be releasing this video, would be also the most likely of these three to end up on the protection list, that being Kiefer Bellows. Like Dal Colle, another left-shotted winger who is a former first-round pick by the Islanders, this time 19th overall in the 2016 entry draft, Bellows, who will again be turning 23 by the time you're watching this video, has played in just 22 games in his NHL career so far across 2 NHL seasons with just 6 points on 5 goals and an assist. So again, still looking for that points production early on in his NHL career, but again, 22 games is not a huge sample size and he hasn't gotten a ton of ice time in the games he has played, so it's hard to say what he will look like at the NHL level when he does finally get there full time. But he has shown, at least to this point, that he is willing to play a little bit more of that physical game, and he also has improved this year from what he did last year when it comes to possession stats at the very least, even though, again, it isn't a whole lot of games that he was playing. Plus, at least at the AHL level, where he's played much more over the last few seasons, he has shown some improvement there, where in his first season a couple of years ago, he had just 19 points in 73 games. But last year he was able to up that to 31 points in 52 games, with 22 of those being goals. So again, a solid young forward with point scoring potential that could turn into a decent NHL player here in a couple of years, but for the Kraken would probably start at the AHL level if he were to get picked by them. The third possibility I see here on the forward end is the youngest of the three by just a little bit anyway. He's another left-shotted winger, but is neither a former first-round pick nor has a birthday coming up this week, and that is Otto Koivula. Taken in the 4th round of that same 2016 entry draft that Bellows was drafted in by the Islanders, Koivula, as you might expect from a 4th rounder, has not played much at the NHL level, but he has played some, getting into 12 games of last year's play, where he failed to put up a point. But considering he averaged just under 8 minutes of ice time per game, that's not terribly surprising. Meanwhile, at the AHL level, where he has spent the majority of his time over the last few years, or at least the time he hasn't been in the Finnish Elite League, he has been more of a points producer there, but still somewhere between a half a point per game to a point in 2 of every 3 games type of player. Though his best season at the AHL level, or at least certainly his most complete one, would be his first season back in 2018-19, where he put up 46 points in 69 games on 21 goals and 25 assists. So he hasn't necessarily shown that year-over-year improvement that Bellows has at the AHL level anyway. With all that having been said though, I'm not sure that points production, or certainly high-end points production at the very least, would be the number one thing that an NHL team would be looking for from Koivula down the road, whether that's the Islanders or the Kraken if they take him. That's because the biggest thing with him is, well, he is pretty big at 6'5" and right around 220 pounds. So for him, the team is probably more looking for a guy that can be a solid physical presence at some point in the NHL and contribute that way. Now, to be fair, he hasn't been a terribly physical player even with his bigger frame, at least to this point in his professional career, but if that's what gets him significant NHL playing time down the road, I'm sure he'd be willing to figure out how to add that to his game. Koivula, though, is likely to not be the only guy at 6'5", 220 pounds that will be available to the Kraken come the expansion draft. And that's because as we move over to the defensive end, Scott Mayfield has a very similar frame at 6'5", 220 pounds. Also, the only player of the 5 that we'll be talking about that has a contract through next season, Mayfield is also easily the oldest and most experienced of the group. At 28 years old, Mayfield has now played in 285 career NHL games across 7 seasons. In that time, the right-shot defenseman has put up 69 career points, nice, on 16 goals and 53 assists. So not a terribly impressive amount of points production even from a defenseman, but he has gotten a pretty decent amount of ice time for the Islanders over the last few seasons especially, and makes up for some of that, I guess what you could call lacking points production, with a more physical game and definitely the ability to get in the way of a number of shots with that bigger frame. Now, it is probably worth mentioning that he certainly isn't the best when it comes to maintaining possession of the puck, as he has considerably more giveaways than takeaways over the course of his career, and that does also bear itself out a little bit in his possession stats, where he has a career Corsi for percentage of just 48, and an expected plus-minus of negative 4.3, but that's really not too bad with the length of a career that he has had. So with Mayfield, size aside, he certainly isn't a standout player in any specific way, and probably isn't the best, or at least has the most potential of any of the players the Kraken could end up taking from the Islanders. But if the Kraken are going to take a guy with a contract from this team, he may very well be the best option when it comes to that, especially considering his contract is pretty reasonable, earning just under $1.5 million per year through 2023. And again, the last guy that we'll be talking about here from the Islanders is another one of these younger players set to be an RFA at the end of the season, at least as I record this anyway. And while I did say at the beginning of this video that the Kraken weren't likely to be getting a player that has a big flashy name that many people know, technically speaking, that isn't necessarily true, as they will very likely have the opportunity to take Sebastian Aho from the Islanders. Of course, to be fair, unless you're a diehard Islanders fan, and maybe even then, this is probably not the first guy you think of when you hear the name Sebastian Aho, as the Sebastian Aho of the Carolina Hurricanes is still very much there and definitely will be protected. Meanwhile, the Islanders' Sebastian Aho is a 25-year-old left-shotted defenseman, again set to be an RFA at the end of this season. He's played just 25 games in his NHL career so far, where he has just 6 points, but again, not a terribly huge sample size, and for what it's worth, he did have 2 points on a goal and an assist in the 3 games that he played in the 2021 season. So who knows, maybe he can keep up that 2 points every 3 games pace that he was on this last season at the NHL level, which, might be wishful thinking, but at least at the time he's had at the AHL level, he's been consistently right around that pace of points production there, where he's been an absolute assist machine with already over 80 assists in right around 150 games in the 3 seasons he's played for the Bridgeport Tigers. Plus, then you can tack on the 21 goals that he has across those 3 seasons, so, not much of a goal scorer, but again, he does put up quite a number of assists, with 20 his first season, then 37 his second season, and then another 27 in this last season in 2020. But for Aho and the future of his career, he probably does have to rely a little bit more on being able to put up those points, or at the very least taking care of and controlling the puck, as he certainly doesn't have the size of some of those other guys we've talked about at just 5'10" and under 200 pounds. In the end though, with the Islanders in the expansion draft, I don't think that Aho is the most likely player the Kraken will end up going with here, or really even the second most likely option. But I do think there's a pretty good chance they go with one of these soon-to-be RFA guys, though it will probably be one of the forwards. Of those guys, I think Bellows is certainly the best option if he is available, and if not, I would personally lean towards Koivula because he is a few years younger, so he would have a little bit more time to develop at the AHL level, which really any one of those 3 guys probably would need. So ultimately, regardless of which one of the 4 RFAs it would be, this is where the scouting department and that stats department that the Kraken have built up will really have to do their job to make sure they get the right guy from the Islanders. As far as a potential trade between the Islanders and Kraken when it comes to the expansion draft, I don't think one's terribly likely to happen here. The Islanders already went down that road with Vegas a few years ago, and I don't know that they're terribly eager to do it again. Plus, the closest thing they really have to incentive to make a trade happen is the fact that they are right up against the cap next season already, so there's a chance they could try to convince the Kraken to take on Anders Lee's contract, but even then I don't think that's terribly likely. If they were to go that route though, they do have quite a decent prospect pool, and outside of missing this year's first round pick, they're pretty set up well with draft picks, so there are plenty of different routes they could go if they really wanted to make a trade. But with that said, we have reached the end of this one and now only have one team left in this series. So if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, again, there's buttons for that kind of stuff down below. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section on who you think the Islanders will protect or who you think the Kraken could end up with. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.